I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hey,
Good to see you all. I see colleagues and co-hosts Diana Hawkins and Andrew Barnhoff from Hawthorne Neighborhood Council. Good to see you guys. First of all, how are you both?
Fine, Al. How are
well,
you? Had a great weekend.
Great, great. I did too. Just the weather today is beautiful. So glad to be here for that, And then I see our friend Michael Rainville here, who's a candidate for Ward 3 and who's been here faithfully every week. Mickey Moore, candidate for Ninth Ward, and faithfully as well. Second, Zia Aida, candidate for Ward 7. Thank you all for being here. Others are invited and are welcome to join. I hope to have a visitor, if maybe even by phone, from out east. Norman Hill was one of the organizers of the 1963 March on Washington. And I spoke to him over the phone like Friday, and we tried to organize the possibility of his joining the program today. I'm not sure that we were successful in getting that connection, but if he is able to join us, it may be not with video, but by phone. And I can tell you that if he is able to join us, we could all consider ourselves participant in a master class, because Norman Hill is one of the titans of the civil rights movement. Let me tell you a minute, just a little bit about him, whether we get him here or not today. We will have him. But he was from a town called Summit, New Jersey, has a bachelor's degree in sociology from Haverford College in the late 50s. It's one of the oldest colleges in America, Haverford. It's in Pennsylvania. And he was one of the first Black graduates of that institution. And after finishing military service, he joined the civil rights movement in Chicago and served as the Chicago coordinator for a lot of the civil rights activity in Chicago. He worked for the Youth March for Integrated Schools. He was with the Chicago Area Negro American Labor Council in a staff capacity, and he was the chairman of the Chicago March Conventions, and he served as a secretary of the Chicago Wade-ins, integrating for the Rainbow Beach. Now, I don't know if y'all remember Wade-ins back in the day. Tekken, you and Mickey might be too young. And I know, Andrew, you'd be too young too. But back in the early days of the movement, as well as sit-ins and dine-ins at restaurants that were prohibiting, Black people, there were even wade-ins at pools that were publicly financed, but that Blacks couldn't go to. So part of the civil rights strategy, the resistance strategy, was to conduct organized wade-ins in places like that. Then he worked for, Norman Hill worked for the Congress of Racial Equality Corps, it was called. And he was at first the East Coast Field Secretary, worked his way up to National Program Director. And as the National Program Director of CORE is Congress of Racial Equality, he helped coordinate the desegregation strategy of, it was called the Route 40 desegregation strategy. And it was like places on Highway 40 that all had travel by Black, American citizens, but all that had restaurants that refused to allow service to Blacks. And they focused on one route, and they did that. That was great. He also worked on the 1964 demonstrations at the Republican National Convention. He's worked with the AFL-CIO and worked with the Selma to Montgomery marches against racial discrimination and more. He ended up becoming active in the A. Philip Randolph Institute. He began as an associate director in 1967, but later became its executive director and finally president. of that organization. The A. Philip Randolph Institute, the legendary civil rights leadership organization. And again, this is one of the titans who helped move the ball both nationally and locally to create awareness and accomplishments for the civil rights movement in this country. And when he was at the Institute, he helped create over 200 local chapters of the organization, including one here in Twin Cities, Minnesota. That's Norman Hill. And I reached out to him because I was reflecting on the fact that August 28th was the anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington. And he's one of the few people who was in leadership that's still alive. He's like 88 years old. And so, if we can't get him today, we'll have the door open for down in the future. I think we're talking to him as we speak, and we're trying to figure out the technology. So if we get him on the program, it'll be great. And if we don't, you've heard a little bit about him, and we'll do more with him in the future. And I see AJ Flowers is here. AJ, long time no see. Good to see you again. So let me start with this. On Mondays, we typically invite people that are candidates for city council to come and talk about what's on their mind, what their issues are. And as I said, Tekken and Mickey have been here regularly, faithfully, and I really appreciate their presence and their interest in communicating their viewpoint, their visions, and their arguments to our listeners and viewers and readers and Insight News. I'm glad that AJ is here and then Michael is here as well. Let me start with asking the two of them to again introduce themselves and talk about their candidacy. And Michael, I'm going to start with you. Say hello again and introduce yourself and your work as a candidate for City Council in Ward 3.
Well, thank you so much, Al. And I really enjoyed being on your show, and I missed you not calling me your brother. So I'll wait to hear that at the end, because I'm
gonna call you your brother right now, brother. Okay. Brother Michael Rainville.
That's we are all sisters and brothers, and I really appreciate that about you, you and Diana, Andrew. You make me feel so welcome. Yeah. And it's been a while since I've been on your show because I've been out working. Okay. I've been out knocking on doors, doing meet and greets, and talking to people. And what's on people's mind, Al, is the violence, and that we will never be able to prosper as a city. We can never help our sisters and brothers who need help. So many people need help. But we cannot provide that if we do not have a calm city. So that's 4 out of 5 people that I talked to raised that issue. And that is something that clearly the new council will have to address immediately.
What suggestions will you bring to the council to address the question of violence?
So it all starts with leadership, and leaders have good words and calm words, and how Chief Arredondo is treated and how the police department is treated matter. There's a reason that almost half of the department has quit. They're treated poorly. They're spoken of badly. Doctors make mistakes and they kill people on the operating table all the time, but we don't ban all surgeons. All professions have bad people. There's bad people everywhere, and you don't blame the whole group. And somehow that's what's happening. So it starts in that leadership role of calmly figuring out how we are going to move forward. Thank goodness for the county sheriff's department. They've been good. They've been filling in a lot of patrols. John Harrington at the state patrol has been really good. And we have to continue and engage Sheriff Hutchinson and John Harrington in the short term while rebuilding our police department. And so many people say, that my idea of really working with Charlie Adams and Chief Arredondo to get our youth, to get city youth to become our public servants. All of us on this broadcast tonight that are running for office, we want to be public servants. We know how noble that is. Well, it's very noble to be a policeman, a fireman, an EMT, and we have to help our young people understand that.
How do you deal with often the unspoken racialization of violence? You almost can't separate the question of race, the question of power, the question of discrimination, from the question of accountability, self-reliance, the question of access. Uh, how do you navigate that? Let me go a little bit more into that.
Sure.
So
And
on,
you raise every complex issue that there
yeah,
is for public safety, Al, because
yeah.
it is so complex.
So the
But
shorthand is that people fear young black people, and much of the violence that we see in the news and in the community is violence that young black people are perpetrating against other young black people, sometimes not. But then there is this overall and historic violence of the society against all black people. And on the one hand, some could say the resistance, the rejection, and the um, right word for it, this rebellion of attitude and spirit within the black community that at the end of the day is self-destructive and is hurting other black people, but it's also a reflection of his historic uh, 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 negative situation that black people have gone through and are going through. So how do you handle that discussion? Uh, Go ahead.
so first of all, you have to listen, and I'm so proud to have many black friends, and I listen. Don Samuels actually gave me some good advice, which is to keep your black friends close. So when there is a crisis, they're there to help advise you. As a white man, I can never speak for the black community, but I can sure listen to the black community. So listening is a big part of that. And I believe, out of so many times, you'll see tragedies produce good outcomes. And the tragedy of George Floyd murder is producing the outcome that as a community, especially the white community, we're listening more and more to the black community, and we realize things have to change and we have to do things differently. And you're absolutely right that this black violence actually hurts the black community more. Uh, when I went to church on Sunday, uh, I prayed for that poor little girl, that 19-year-old from North High, who got the bullet in her neck. She should be in Chicago right now, going to nursing school. She might not ever talk again, and that's just terrible. Time and time again, Bishop Powell says the best from Shiloh Temple. It's the youth that's suffering from this. So, all of us have to listen, and we have to change. And I do believe that change is coming. It's always going to be slower than it should. It's never going to be enough, but the change is coming, and the attitudes of the white community and the larger community have changed, and they're changing for the better. But it
Name
all starts with listening, Al. You have to listen.
then following up on that, name three other priorities that you are hearing that constituents in the ward want their leadership to address. What are the three things besides the question of youth violence and safety and peace and public safety? What are the other priorities that you see the public is looking for?
What I've been hearing when I'm out knocking doors is focusing on hiring into our diverse populations, especially with women. No one can de-escalate a situation better than a woman. Of course, whatever we can do to get police to live in our community, it probably has to be an economic incentive. There is a state law that forbids the city passing a residency rule. So I hear that we want policing to be our neighbors, and just the overall attitude of police, that there is a stronger system of discipline in place, so that people like Chauvin can't slip through the cracks anymore. If you look at his track record, so the sergeant knew he was not a good police officer. The lieutenants knew, but the sergeants and lieutenants get transferred, he stays the same. There has to be a better way of tracking problem officers, getting them the help, because clearly they need help. And if that doesn't work, to move them into another profession. So those are the three big things that I'm hearing when I knock on doors, Al.
Michael Rainville, thank you. Let me turn to AJ Flowers. AJ, good to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me? Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we do. See you
I'm good. How you
and
doing,
hear
Mr.
you.
McFarlane?
Yeah, glad to have you here. Let's pose the same questions to you. First of all, give you an opportunity to make the argument why vote for A.J. Flowers. Talk about your candidacy and speak directly to the voters and the listeners about what you want to bring representing them on City Council.
So thank you for that. For everyone who don't know me, my name is AJ Flowers. I'm Al Flowers Jr. I come from a family of activists, a family of fighters, and a family of freedom fighters in public service in different levels. I ran for city council because our city needs strong leadership, and they need young, strong leadership that can actually speak on behalf of the people that is going through the violence, the people that is dying, and the people that is underhoused, and the people that are undereducated. And that's people that look like me, and people that look like all of us, and within our impoverished community. One of the main reasons that I'm trying to do, one of the main things that I'm going to get done, if I become your city council member, is I'm going to work along with our police department to try to find out better solutions, and not just with police, but that's also working with the community leaders. That's also working with our faith-based initiatives and our faith-based places and our community associations, so we can come up with a collaborative plan to help thwart this violence. We know violence in itself is not just violence as we see every day. Violence within itself is usually the conditions that we face within our life that causes violence. I'm not making excuses for anybody, but I do believe that if you don't have housing, you don't have a good paying job, and if you don't have quality education, your chances of ending up in a violent nature is going to be higher than some that does have them different opportunities and different resources. So one of the main reasons I ran, and I've been a fighter my whole life, is because I've seen that when I go to these council meetings and during the political time, you get a lot of people that come into our community and ask for our votes and try to speak about our young people and talk about what they're going to do for us. And then once they get into them positions and once they get into the city council, they usually forget about us and they start working with their special interest groups and their big developers. That has been a problem that's been going on far too long in our city. A lot of people come get parachuted in our city, have no connection to the soil of our city. As I say, I don't come from all this extra stuff. I come from the soil. I represent for the struggle, and that's how I'm going to come. And that's what we need in our city. We need more people who actually understand the constituents that they're running for, not just going for one special interest, whether it's one side or the other side. We need somebody that understands both sides of the fence, that understands. I had an auntie that was a police officer. My father was abused by the Minneapolis police officer. This is all in Minneapolis. So I know both sides of the equation, but we need more people that has the leadership and the strength to say it when it needs to be done, to fight for us when them big developers and special interest groups get in the room, and someone that's not afraid to make things uncomfortable to make sure we can get the change that we need within our city.
Talk about the question of youth violence. It's on everybody's mind. We talk about it every day. And within the family of the Black community, we talk about how horrific it is in the neighborhood. And sometimes we talk about things privately within our community that we don't say outside of the community. But I believe that this is a time that we have to sort of shout to the world, what our position is and what we see as the challenges and what we bring as solutions. So I'm gonna, with that kind of parameter, have you focus on the question of how the public perceives Black people and Black youth in particular, and then how do we address that so that those who are perceived in a certain way don't get locked into stereotypical situations and lack of opportunity that sort of moves them down the pipeline, to what do you call it, to dysfunctional negative behavior, because that's all they see as the way out. How do discuss that whole dynamic from your point of view?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think it's upon any of us, especially as a Black man or Black woman or indigenous people, to try to change anybody's perception of what they believe about us. I mean, okay. the fact of the matter is we've been in this country for 400 years. So the perception about us has been the same way regardless, no matter what we're doing in life or how we're moving or what steps of life that we're going. I think that's more, like Michael Rainville said, that's more to the white community to be able to fix their perception and actually start talking and listening and understanding the people that you say you have perception about before you start judging. Because if we go off the judgmental way, we can judge everybody. Everybody has sins that they have committed before. So I don't think, I would just say right off the bat, it's not upon any Black person to try to make another white person or anybody Especially if you're out here trying to do the right thing, try to make them like me more. That's not what I'm in here to do, and I won't. And if that's the case, oh well, I probably won't be liked by everybody, and that's not an intention of mine. But when we think of young violence, we think of youth violence. I think it goes back to what I said, and it's about the conditions that we face. You know, the conditions that we're living in. You know, the world. They took away in our Black community. They took away our leaders in the early 60s and 70s. They made our leaders be entertainers and drug dealers. So now when our young people, when they have the opportunities that you have, unless you're performing at an elite level in education or elite level in athletics or something like that, then you get stuck by the wayside. The difference between kids in the community, and I'll say people of color kids in the community, and kids that don't live in the community is the opportunities that they get. It's a different chance that they get, the tutoring systems, the way their teachers work. If you go look at the teachers in the suburbs outside of Minneapolis, they're so eager and ready to get back to teach the students. But for some reason, our teachers in Minneapolis, they're not focusing on that. Maybe if we had a teachers federation that actually focused on educating our young people and actually working on that way instead of trying to defund our police department, that would probably help us a little bit go along the way too. I always say this, I don't care what color you is, black, white, purple, brown, if you do not have education, if you do not have adequate housing and you don't have a chance at economics, then you're going to go into the same situation as anybody. And it's been proven over time. It's not like only the Black community, it's any community that does not have a chance or the opportunity to actually show different platforms and show different chances and see different things outside of life, see business ventures outside of life. You know, all our business ventures in the community, unfortunately, a lot of them, the influences that we see, it do be people that's doing the wrong thing. And that's because we're always in a struggling state. We're always living paycheck to paycheck. You go out to the northern part of Minnesota, and you see the type of job offerings they got for uneducated white males. They're ranging from $25, $20, $30 an hour. But then you come to Minneapolis, and they offer us jobs and say, well, we're offering them jobs, and the jobs range at $12, $13, $14 an hour. That's the problem. We have to make sure that we can actually get some adequate resources. If we don't have no economic chances within our city, then there's no chance at all. Because as long as we're going to still be at the bottom part and we have some of the worst disparities in the country, we can focus on everything else, which is the trick bag, which is what they want us to do, focus on everything else. But we got to focus on the real issues, which is our economics, which is our housing, which is our education. Now, I can't affect education as a city council member, but what I can do is help open up after school programs within our city and within our department to work with some of them underprivileged kids that we got. So when it comes to it, it's a whole full perspective. I don't think it's just this or that. Most of it's saddening. It can be music, it can be a lot of things that go into it, but I think the main key point is the resources, because we're not going to save everybody. Let's be real about that. Some folks going to have to get their butt in jail. Some folks going to have to go to prison. I'm not sitting here saying that's not going to happen. But for the ones who are trying to do a different opportunity and have no chances, we got to be able to do a better job to have them opportunities for them. And we got to make sure everyone is stepping up to the plate and actually listening to our needs and not only doing this for right now during this political election time.
So it sounds like, and you're right on point, AJ, talking about the creating of a new narrative. And when I talked about how people perceive young Black people, how the question of youth violence is portrayed in media, I guess I am talking about the training of the public to fear Black people. And that training also ends up with Black people fearing Black people. You may end up fearing your nephew or niece, your cousin, your twin brother or sister, because of all the negative energy that has been placed in the information environment. The narrative is a narrative that puts you and puts us in a place of disadvantage, and it's intended to maintain us in that position. So I think you're right in saying it's not about trying to get somebody to like you, but how do you attack the institutional systems that support the devaluation of Black life and support the restriction of opportunity, and that support this despair where people in our community give up and say, I can't make it, it's not going to happen. That was my point. Let me have you talk about that a little bit more, because this is a great way to bring in our guest, Brother Norman Hill. But go ahead, AJ, respond again.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's more about, and what I mean by that, it's more about us actually trying to fight to help save ourselves and actually trying to fight to help bring back love and bring back value within our community and bring back care within our community. If we sit there and try to appease or do something like that for somebody. I mean, we've been doing it. We've been trying to do that for a long time here, and it hasn't worked. So I don't have the answer to how to make somebody who already have a perception about me or a perception about how I feel. Because let me tell you something. I was one of them kids too. Or one of them young people, I should say. I don't like using the word kids. I was one of them young people myself. So and I have family members and people that I know personally who has died from this violence. So when I say this type of stuff, I'm emotionally attached to this too, because I actually know the people that's in the community. I actually know some of the people that's dying, and unfortunately know some of the people that did some of the shooting. So the one thing that I say is that I know this is a real issue that we face, but at the same time, when we're going through that issue, a lot of times we focus too much more on the negative than we actually do on the positives that we have in our community. We focus more on the things that goes wrong than we do the things that go right within our community. Right now, we're in a tragedy, we're in a crisis. The only way we're going to save our community is we got to start saving each other. We got to work with each other. We can't be afraid of each other if we want to save each other. We can't say we want to fight for them young people if we're afraid to talk to some of them very young people. Because let me tell you something. There's some young people out there that ended up in this situation that didn't want to be in this situation, but some tragic happened to their life. Somebody they looked up to, probably a cousin, an uncle, an auntie. Now we getting young girls got a little cousin. How about that? How about being a 16, 17-year-old trying to do the right thing and your little cousin gets shot in the head?
Mama's here. Look, Mom there. Mama's here.
Something like that. That changed any man's perspective. That doesn't matter color or anything involved in it. The way that we have to do it is we got to actually work with the people who's outside right now, the boots on the ground organizations that's actually outside, to bring a different narrative into our people, actually show them different people, that actually show people that fight for them, that looks like them, and that's not trying to do it just for a political game. But when it comes down to it as far as perception, like I said, I couldn't get in trying to change somebody else's perception. All I try to do is try to change ours.
Let me hold up. That's great response, AJ. I just want to say, Brother Norm, I think when we're getting your conversation on top of our conversation, but let's do this. Norman Hill, I introduced you and talked about you when we just got the program started, talking about your beginning in Summit, New Jersey, your attending Haverford College in Pennsylvania, and your work in Chicago to join the civil rights movement. And I ended up talking about your leadership at the A. Philip Randolph Institute. But I'm sure that the statements made by Michael Rainville and A.J. Flowers are ones that bring a particular set of memories to you, because you've been watching the development of the movement in our people for several generations. I said that you were one of the ones that worked with Bayard Rustin and others to launch the March on Washington in 1963, and that you've headed the A. Philip Randolph Institute. So welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. And I wanted you to reflect, if you would, on the March on Washington, and use that as a tipping point to talk about the movement of our people towards equality and freedom in this country, and talk about where we are right now. And where we are right now, I think, is informed by the passionate statements that A.J. Flowers, who's a Chicagoan. You born here, A.J., right? You're born in Twin Cities, A.J.? Or born in Chicago?
Yes, sir. No, I'm Minneapolis, baby, born and raised, Southside.
Right, but your dad is from Chicago, so you got roots in Chicago.
Father from Chicago, mother from Georgia, right. Yeah.
Okay, so Brother Norman Hill, welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane.
Thank you very much. I was actually staff coordinator for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom that took place on August 28, 1963, working directly with my mentors, A. Philip Randolph, who was this nation's greatest black labor leader, and Bayard Rustin, an outstanding civil rights leader in his own right. They initiated and organized an event of great remembrance and pride when 250,000 people marched on the nation's capital at the Lincoln Memorial for Jobs and Freedom. They had both a race and class component to the march, focusing on immediate civil rights demands to bring down Jim Crow, particularly in the South, and calling for a national jobs march to put all the unemployed back to work with a decent level of minimum wage that would enable all people to live well and decently. They set up the political climate that included the speeches of civil rights giant, the late Congressman John Lewis, the A. Philip Randolph himself, with the imagery and speechifying of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote dream, unquote. They helped to create the climate that pressured and influenced President Lyndon B. Johnson to press the Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the most comprehensive piece of civil rights legislation up to that point in the country's history, followed by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But I would suggest that although we have established the legal platform for racial equality, that the job is unfinished and undone of achieving racial equality and economic justice because we face a new threat, a threat unlike anything that we've seen in modern times, a threat to democracy itself. So I would suggest that it's a time not to memorialize, but to mobilize. And this is a threat to the very exercise of our basic constitutional right, the right to vote. It is a Republican-led movement to, in fact, make it harder to vote, to restrict polling places and the ballot box, to restrict early hours and vote by mail, to require strict ID requirements, all of which would have a negative impact on Black and brown and poor voters. We have seen it manifested recently in Georgia, which enacted the most restrictive voter suppression voting laws in the country's history, soon to be followed by the state of Texas, with a targeted draconian set of voting suppression laws. This is part of a litany of state-centered voter restriction and voter suppression efforts. Particularly noted is the rules that would give state legislatures the right to overturn election results based on the thinnest evidence of voter fraud. What we must do, and the past marches this Saturday were a beginning, is mobilize a grassroots coalition made up of Blacks and browns, the LGBTQ community, women, labor, Native Americans, political activists like Stacey Abrams and Reverend William J. Barber II, and as well as elected officials led by the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Joyce Beatty, to mount an effort to bring about the passage of federal civil rights legislation. We can do that by pressing for the end of the filibuster, a requirement of a supermajority of 60 votes to pass federal legislation. If not an end to the filibuster, at least a carve out when it comes to matters of constitutional import, of which the vote clearly quantifies. In this context, we must mobilize grassroots lobbying coalition to press the Congress to do the very thing of creating a baseline of national voter participation and access to the ballot, which overturns the state efforts to suppress voters, along with the enactment of the John Lewis Voting Rights and Advancement Act, which would in fact restore what was taken away by conservative-leaning Supreme Court, the right to a pre-clearance and clearance of any new voting laws, to make sure that they do not dilute minority voting strength and in fact are genuinely democratic. This is the context in which we find ourselves today, when it's not just the question of civil rights, it's a question of maintaining democracy itself, because without the vote, there is no democracy. And without democracy, there is no America. I suggest briefly that this is where we come. This is the shoulders on which we base our current march and thrust, going back to 63 and finding ourselves faced with today, 2021, late August of this year.
Thank you so much. That was great, great piece and great reflection and a great challenge for all of us. Organize, mobilize, organize, mobilize. And I want to have our candidates respond to the challenge you've put forth, Brother Hill. Mickey, haven't heard from you today, and I want Michael and AJ to come back in. Hopefully Tekken will come back again. Brother Hill, Mickey Moore, and Al Flowers, both Ward 9, right?
That's right.
So these two gentlemen are competing for an open seat on Ward 9 in South Minneapolis. That's the ward, I believe, where George Floyd was killed. So they're
Right.
at ground zero, the epicenter of the reckoning that not only is happening here in Minnesota, but it's happening throughout the country, and one could say throughout the world. A reckoning that encompasses and enfolds and builds on all the work of you and the other pioneers of the civil rights movement have advanced. This moment stands on your shoulders, just as you stood on the shoulders of brave men and women, freedom fighters before you. And then, so I want them to respond. And Michael Rainville is running for a ward. It's mostly northeast Minneapolis and parts, I think. Are you still parts of North Minneapolis, Michael? Parts of downtown? Or southeast? You're muted. You're muted.
I have the North Loop Warehouse District, Mill District, and Central Business District, as well as Southeast Minneapolis.
Michael Rainville is part of a tradition, a legacy leadership family, people that have run the city of Minneapolis City Council in particular over several generations. So he's rooted and vested in the history, but also the future of our community. So let me first start with you, Mickey Moore, reflections on feedback, and in the process, introduce yourself both to Norm and contextualize this powerful testimony and your experience, if you would.
Well, I mean, I think I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say I got goosebumps listening to you, Mr. Hill. I mean, just thinking about the impactful moments that you have been a part of and making that change on the ground that we're seeing now, that we are the results of. Our ward actually has, I can't even count, AJ, maybe you could help me out, 6 or 7 Black people running for the same city council seat. It's never happened in Minneapolis before, where we've had this many candidates, all people of color, vying for the city council position, we have no choice but to elect a person of color from Ward 9 this year. And that just thrills me beyond explanation. I can't tell you how uplifting that is and how joyful that is to me, that we're going to put diversity onto the city council no matter who is elected. That's just so meaningful. And we're in a position like this because of the work that people like you have done. I want to point out one thing, and I would feel remiss if I didn't say this. Minnesota is known historically as a huge voter turnout state. We lead the nation. We love to pat ourselves on the back for leading the nation in voter turnout. But let me be clear. That is for presidential elections. That does not hold true for municipal local city elections. When it comes to local city elections, Minneapolis, like many other cities around the country, for whatever reasons, for our own reasons, is shamefully low with our turnout. We hover around 30% turnout for municipal elections. 3 out of 10 Minneapolis residents bother to come out and vote. And if we do not do something about those numbers, about those statistics, we are always going to be facing an uphill battle in getting what we all want, in getting what we all believe in, the common goals that we all share are not going to be reflected in our voting because we don't all show up and vote. So if I could say anything today to the people that are listening on Mr. Hill's behalf and on the behalf of everybody in Minneapolis who wants a better future, please get out and vote. Make yourself aware of the issues and of the candidates. Find out who is out there and who you need to support. Do your due diligence. Everybody's got a website. Everybody's got information. Almost everybody's got their phone number. I know I've got my phone number plastered everywhere. You could call me anytime. Okay, I love to talk to people about their issues and concerns. And Michael Rainville's out there knocking on doors, and I know AJ is too, and so am I. But we can't possibly knock and talk to every single person in the city. So we need help from the residents to reach out to us to make their best effort to make sure that they know what these issues are, what these ballot initiatives are all about, which way they need to vote, which candidate they need to support. If we do this, if we all work together, we will come up with the consensus best leader for our city and for our residents, and we will move forward as a city. We will move to that positive ground that we're all trying to get to. But it's going to take a little bit of work. It's not going to happen on its own. We can't just sit back in the couch and expect everything to get better while we don't take part in it. We have to become a part of that change that we want to see in ourselves and in our city if we're ever going to achieve it.
Mickey, let me bring Michael Rainville in. Michael Rainville, the Rainville family, Norm Hill, is a family associated with the labor movement in Minnesota. They sort of helped put the meaning in the predominant party in Twin Cities, which is the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, DFL. And the Rainvilles are torch bearers in that arena as advocates and leaders in labor. Michael, reflections, thoughts, comments, questions for Norman Hill?
So first of all, Mr. Hill, thank you so much for your inspirational words. And I agree with you 100%. I can't speak as impassionately as Mickey, but absolutely democracy hinges on the right to vote. And if the federal government has to step in and ensure that and supersede the states, then so be it, because democracy will not allow us to move forward as a country and to help all those people that we need to help. In that same light, to create the hope that is needed to make everybody prosper, to help everybody, you need jobs. And that's where the labor movement has come in so well in the United States of America and in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. The hope that is created because you can earn your way through life, you can help your family out, you can have a nice car. Jobs and the dignity that jobs bring are so important. And when I listen to you, Mr. Hill, I think, yes, create that dignity, create that hope, and jobs, good education, Al. AJ, you talked a little bit about jobs. 100%. Education is needed so badly so we can get those good jobs. Jobs that pay well. Jobs that pay $50 an hour, not $14 an hour. So Al McFarlane, I thank you for having me on the show today. And Norm, excuse me, Mr. Hill, I appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge, and I will take your advice to heart as I continue this campaign and hopefully become a leader in Minneapolis.
Thank you. Continue your activism.
AJ, jump in. What are your thoughts as you reflect on the words, the story, the narrative that Mr. Hill has presented?
First off, I want to just thank you, Mr. Hill, for enlightening us, giving us all some of that education that we need. And I would love to sit down with you anytime that we can. Mr. McFarlane can exchange your number with me, but I think it's the reason why I'm here where I'm at right now, Mr. McFarlane, is hearing the fact, and I'm so thankful that I have the opportunity right now. We're talking about voter suppression. I mean, I even have the opportunity to even run for a spot like a city council. And I know it comes from the work that our ancestors put in all the way up until this point and to get to this point. As I said, my mom is from Georgia. So she's down there in Georgia right now facing the brunt of what they're trying to do with voter suppression and different voter identities. And what it comes down to me is I believe we got to put more people in leadership positions, people in positions of power that's actually going to look out for the common being of the regular people, that's going to actually look out for the common being, the common interest of people that look like me and people of color, particularly in the ADOS community. To think about how much fighting we did, and we're in 2021, and we're a year removed from George Floyd, and the first thing that the Republicans do is come back and try to go with voter suppression. To me, it just entails why this fight is so serious, why this time that we're living in right now, this moment, this movement that we're living in right now is so serious. That's why I do the work that I do now when I'm working with the Young People Task Force. I'm already working with the Young People Task Force. I'm trying to sit down with the chief. I sit down with the chief at Donald. I want to sit down with the unions. I try to sit down in these places so we can come up with a common solution, because too often we're not even getting a chance to make it to the voting polls. Too often we're not even getting a chance to make it to the fact of 18. Too often our 18-year-olds who graduate from high school, like our young sister from North High, she gets shot in her neck right away. And we getting people that's dying that's not even getting the opportunity. So when I think about voter suppression and think about how much that affects us, especially in a municipal and local way, it's almost it's disgusting, but not surprising to me. And that's why it's more important, like I said, that not to try to change the perception, but to change our narrative and to make sure that we fight hard and understand that while we're fighting on one issue and we're fighting on public safety, the system of systematic racism is a whole system within itself. And there's so many different ways that these barriers within that they work to try to suppress us. And that just shows another thing. I'm just honored to be on here with Mr. Hill and to be thinking of myself as a young Black activist who's a freedom fighter who fight now. And I'll just leave with this. Somebody asked me, AJ, when I was running, they said, man, do you think you're too much of a freedom fighter to run for a city council position? And I thought about that. I'm like, you know what, maybe, that's what I come from. But then I thought, no, it's the fact that I am a freedom fighter that I should be running for this city council position. We need more freedom fighters. We need more people that's going to fight for the dignity and the humanity of people inside of them positions, especially in positions of power. So, Mr. Hill, I thank you. And like I said, I look forward to hopefully getting a chance to sit down and meet you one day.
Norm, Mr. Hill, I want to ask you to spend a few minutes just reflecting on some of the people that you've worked with that have mentored you or challenged you, and people that you have mentored. This is about the connections we make with each other in our commitment to liberation, freedom, to the development of humanity, of humankind. So I know that you worked with Dr. King, and I know that you worked with A. Philip Randolph. Talk about some of the people that you had up close and personal contact with as they were, and you shaping a new direction for our country.
I was in Memphis, Tennessee, helping to generate community support, working with the staff of Dr. King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the American Federation of State County Municipal Employees, generating community support for the striking Black sanitation workers. I was there when King was assassinated, which in fact lost the soul of the civil rights movement. But we came back and we decided that we would make the march that we were organizing in support of the sanitation workers have a dual purpose. Not only to support the struggle of the sanitation workers to unionize, but to memorialize Dr. King. I also was mentored by A. Philip Randolph, who was this nation's greatest Black labor leader, the founder of the most historically significant union for Black workers, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, whose foundation all the recent struggles of working people, working low-wage working people, owe an enormous debt to the lonely struggle of the sleeping car porters, which became the first union with Black leadership to negotiate a contract from a major employer, what was then the Pullman Company. Randolph was the dean of and father of the modern civil rights movement and the initiator of the August 28, 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. My other mentor was Bayard Rustin, a civil rights leader in his own right, arrested over 20 times in the struggle for racial equality in this country, a master strategist and tactician of the civil rights movement, and the organizer and deputy director of the epic 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. I knew and worked with civil rights giant, the late Congressman John Lewis, who literally put his body on the line for civil rights, was arrested and beaten and jailed to, in fact, hasten and bring about racial equality and economic justice in this country. These are just some of the people that I worked with in my time as a long-time civil rights activist. But I would like just to add one note that I hope would give us an opportunity to come back and be a part of your radio show.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, Velma Hill, and I have written a memoir whose title is Climbing the Rough Side of the Mountain. It chronicles our trade union and civil rights experiences that enabled us to be the only Black couple to hold leadership positions in both the civil rights and labor movements. And so we would welcome the opportunity to come and talk about our memoir, which talks about our impact and our experiences on the civil rights movement in a personal, upfront, and close manner.
We welcome the opportunity. Thank you so much. And thank you to Mrs. Hill, Mrs. Velma Hill, for helping facilitate this conversation today. You know, I'm going to close with this. Maybe, Norm, give a word of instruction or advice to these young leaders. Young Michael Rainville, I call him Brother Rainville. He's a friend. Mickey Moore, a person who I haven't known personally until this process, but who I have come to respect and enjoy because he's clear, he's forceful, he's intent. And to AJ Flowers, I love to hear him. I know his family, his father and I. His father was that candidate for the mayor of Minneapolis, and I believe we endorsed his father's candidacy, and we have worked to elevate and help our community know this passion that the Flowers family represents. His aunt is a former police officer. The father, though, beat up several times, badly, by the Minneapolis Police Department, but still remains an advocate for safety, public safety, recognizes the value of proper public safety, stands against, and wants to figure out how to protect us from ill-informed and ill-intentioned people that abuse the power of law enforcement and of government. So any final word to them, Norman Hill?
I would say, especially to young people, but to all of today's activists, that the words of A. Philip Randolph give us guidance and inspiration and motivation. He said, freedom is never a final fact, but a continuing evolving process to higher and higher levels of human, social, economic, political, and religious relationships. At the banquet table of nature, there are no reserved seats. You get what you can take and you keep what you can hold. If you can't take anything, you won't get anything. And if you can't hold anything, you won't keep anything. And you can't take anything without organization. Let that be our thrust, not just today, not just tomorrow, but as long as we live and breathe.
What a lesson, what a lesson, what a lesson. Sir, I thank you so much. I knew this would be a moment of inspiration, and I'm looking forward to the follow-up, talking to you and Velma Hill about your collaboration and the new book that you have authored as well. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you break.
We've had enough
of all the money you make.
We've had enough.
No more life at stake.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you were breaking.
We had enough
of all the money you were making.
We had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We had enough.
This is a proclamation.
Free or guilty,
It's gonna get filthy.
you better believe. Just roll up your sleeves.
It's gonna get rough. It's gonna be tough.
We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough
Of all the rules you're breaking.
We've had enough.
All the money you're making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is the proclamation.
We've had enough.
Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice.
We've had enough.
Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price.
We've had enough.
Philando, Breonna, George Floyd.
What? We've had enough.
So many gone, how can we fill the void?
How can we feel?
We had enough. John Crawford, I know you've heard.
We've had enough.
Sandra Bland, come on and take a stand.
We've had enough.
Sean Bell, what the hell?
We've had enough.
Freddie Gray, did you hear what I said?
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.